It began with the story of a boy, a girl, and a universe. It became an epic battle between the forces of good and evil. Now, return to a galaxy far, far away. The saga lives on. Return of the Jedi. Rated PG. Starts Wednesday, May 25th at a theater in your galaxy.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perona, and I have James here with me. Say hi, James.
Hello, hello.
Well, today we're going to be wrapping up, but maybe we're not, talking about Star Wars comic books, the original movie adaptations. We've done 2 shows about this already. We tackled, the first film, Star Wars, A New Hope, and then we did Empire, and now we're doing Jedi. This is the movie adaptation comic book originally put out by Marvel. Very different in a way than the first one, the original Howard Chaykin one, the one that I remember we talked about, the fact that it looks so different than the real thing because they had so little to go on. Last time when we talked about Empire, we talked about that at that point, Star Wars was more successful. They were able to give the artist a lot of more material to work with beforehand, so they're just not just doing complete, interpretations out of thin air practically. They actually had some good stuff to go on. This time, by the time you get to Jedi, this thing is looking a lot more like the final product, as far as how the characters look. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about. Why don't we start off a little bit with the history of how we ever even seen these things? Because let me just mention first that with Star Wars, because there was nothing like it before, and even with Empire, because it was the second time around and everybody was so rabidly waiting for something, we were grabbing things as they were coming and chewing them to little tiny pieces. With Jedi, I think, the luster was a little faded, I think. And even though we were rabid about the product, some of the secondary, I would call them, tie-ins, I remember not going as crazy about it in terms of, oh my God, I got to get my hands on this, I got to get my hands on that. With that said, we talked about in the past how, for example, the storybook, the movie storybook was something that I went completely nuts and spoiled myself to pieces. But what is your history with the particular comic, and in which manner did you first see it?
Well, the comic came out as more of a magazine format, the entire movie first. But it was released a little too early, and it was a mistake. I was very fortunate at the time because I did collect comics, and I collected them from a company that, when you mailed away for comics and Marvel mailed them to you, they would come in the mail in these brown wrappers, and often they were damaged. And I didn't trust it anymore because I was trying to be a collector, so I was getting a lot of comics. And the era of comic shops hadn't really begun yet. So we're talking still early 1983, this era. And unfortunately, there were no comic shops near me. So what happened was there was a shop in a North Jersey mall, and they were very well respected, and they would let you order the comics you wanted. If it was comic related, they would sell all that kind of stuff, just like the modern comic shops. Well, this particular title, Return of the Jedi, was very, very expected. And by the time it was about to come out, it wound up being early by a month. Somehow the distributor, they printed it, they got distributed, and it was a mistake.
Wow.
So I got that about, I guess the movie came out around the 25th or so of, and the book came out probably around the 3rd, and I had it, and I read it all. And I guess at that point there was already a Time magazine had gave a little bit of a tease of some of the new scenes.
Right.
And
I guess they made the same mistake they did with the storybook. They let them out too early out of the gate, and people were spoiling themselves.
Yeah, and I am not one to be anti-spoiler. It is what it is. And so I read it all. I let other people peruse it quickly with tissues on their hands as if it was going to be so valuable. But at the time, you know, I was just very, very much into my comics, so I just didn't want people with their dirty, grubby paws all over it.
And just to make it clear, what did the cover look like from this particular one?
The cover basically had Luke front and center with the characters around him, some artwork of some other characters, and of course Vader's head and some spaceships behind him.
And it's very dark from what I remember.
Yeah, and it was really nice artwork. I had been impressed with it. The funny thing is, there was only one thing that was different, and it did not allude to the actual death of Yoda or Yoda turning into the Force Ghost.
Yeah.
It basically led on that maybe Yoda had gone to sleep and Luke finished with him, but it didn't actually say, yeah, that goodnight Yoda, we're done. As pretty much in the movie, you're crystal clear because he disappears and he turns into the Force Ghost that he's probably dead at this point. But it was really decent. It was really nice artwork. I was pleased. I had no problem with the final product. It looked, as you said, a lot like the finished movie, which leads me to believe by this point in time that because everybody was on board as like a team rather than pieces being sold later,
right,
that they saw most of the movie and saw most of the artwork and some of the film of the artist and things like that. And Marvel had already had a long-standing relationship with Star Wars and Lucas, because at this point they had already, by this point we're talking 5.5 years or so of Star Wars comics.
Oh yeah.
They had done Indiana Jones, some Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff and some Indiana Jones things. They had Indiana Jones series. And I think, like you said, it was basically the machine was in motion. There wasn't as much a surprise. There wasn't as much reason for them not to be open with their partners, action figures. We've talked about this, about some of the figures and things. They didn't quite unveil everything to the public, and they didn't want you to know every little detail. But at this point in time, it was coming to the end. They didn't realize how much of the end it was for many years, but it was coming to the end that this was it, and get it out there. But nobody wanted it out before the movie came out, and that's where I came in.
Well, let me just clarify something here that when we mentioned earlier, this is pretty much the same team that was assembled for Empire Strikes Back. And by that, I mean Archie Goodwin was the person who adapted it, who kind of wrote the lines for this comic version. And the artists were Al Williamson and Carlos Garzon, who that trio, if you will, are the ones that just continue. In other words, they don't redo it.
Well, they were the best ones also. I feel they were the best. We've talked about it before.
Compared to the first batch, yes.
Yeah, I loved Al Williamson's work. Archie Goodwin was very, reverential to the material. He was not trying to give you some kind of crazy interpretation, some more modern things like we see now, how they tried to. Yeah, so I was pleased with what I got. I think the Empire one is more striking when you look at it and some of the characters, and even though there's still some slight differences, this wasn't comic book by number, but it's still artistic and good quality. But there's no surprises in this when you're looking at it. You're going to say, yeah, this looks like Return of the Jedi should look.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I noticed about the again, those names is that as we move forward with different versions of the same thing that, Marvel will put out, then Dark Horse gets their hands on it, then Marvel gets their hands on it again. What they basically end up doing, and we'll talk about this, is they keep obviously the words, the written words are the same, the art is the same, but the coloring, they do a lot of changes in coloring that normally I would say, who gives a crap? Coloring is color, colors are colors, but there is a big difference. The I'm holding here in my hands right now is the 4 comic book version of this thing, the one that they broke apart. And the first thing I notice off the bat is the quality of the pages. They're kind of almost pseudo newspaper pages, how flimsy they feel. Nowadays, you have comic books that are super glossy. They feel good in your hand. You rub the page, they feel good. This stuff looks like if you rub it too much, it's going to come off in your fingers.
The ones you're holding, I do recall at the time, they seemed like they were printed very cheaply and very almost cheesy. And it was a bit of a disappointment. And the thing they did different here, which I'm still not quite sure. It's probably to get more comics out there at the same time. During Empire, we've talked about how they released them as part of the Star Wars comics line, and they worked
they try to make them part of the whole line.
Yeah,
right.
I think it was issue 39 to 45, if I'm not mistaken. Well, instead of doing that, they had a lead-up type episode. There was a storyline. Then eventually they built in a lead-up type episode of right before the movie. You then, I guess, were expected to read the Return of the Jedi adaptation, which is
and then get back to business.
And then get back to it kind of picked up after, and then you say, okay, now we're back into the post-Jedi era. And okay, it all works out. It's very interesting that they did that. I think that was just the style Marvel was doing. Get right on the top of what you're looking at. It's number 1 in a 4-issue limited series, and then you'd have number 2 and number 3.
Right. It's 1 out of 4. It even has the dates here: October, November, December, and January. That's the order that these individuals
They were always
released.
ahead by a few months the way they did it. So that October was probably more like June or July, if I recall correctly, when it became available at the stand. And again, the covers are nice. And of course, I bought those as well because, I want to be a completist. But I think if I recall correctly, that's how Marvel was doing their miniseries. They would do, if it was a miniseries on the X-Men or like Wolverine or somebody that had their own, I remember actually Nightcrawler or somebody had their own book, limited book, and they would do it style like that. And I think I would have liked in hindsight, I would have liked it to be built in, but the way they did it, they probably just wanted more to maximize.
Let me ask you something. With these individual comics, the 4-issue ones, they kind of lay them out in a traditional comic book fashion. And by that, what I mean is you have the story. There's the story, 12, 13 pages of the story of Return of the Jedi, of that portion of Return of the Jedi. In the beginning, they have a title page with a little art that is done exclusively for that issue. And each issue has this opening art that is not really part, it's part of the story, but it's not part of the film. Then at the end, you have these little mini posters that are page-size mini posters. What I want to know is that, did your original comic, the one that you had that has everything under one, did it include, do you remember if it included these little individual posters, or it was just story and that's it?
It included some artwork that would be considered like a poster. Yeah, I recall that there were pages that looked like characters or something that they weren't the covers. You had to get those covers. You had to buy. It's not like we saw the covers that were eventually going to come out. No, that was special. This was more like a magazine, super special style, not quite graphic novel because it was still printed like a magazine. Yeah. But it was, it was the size of about a People magazine or something.
Right, like a regular Time mag. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, now, and you know what? The funny thing is, its value didn't hold. You can probably find them very easily. Any version of this Return of the Jedi, the original ones. It's like there are still a few Star Wars comics, the original run.
I'm sure you can get it for $10 on eBay, probably.
Yeah, maybe even. Maybe even cheaper if a guy hasn't got a couple of them. So if there's somebody who's a big fan and wants to have it the way it came out, well, yeah, it's out there. Lucky for fans, everything isn't through the roof.
Well, one of the things that I want to mention a little bit here is that one of the exciting things about the earlier, especially with Empire, that particular comic book release, was that you got to see some deleted scenes, in comic book version that you never had your hands on. And that's the type of thing that kept us going for all these years. Like, when are they going to put out the Wampa scene? When are they going to put out this scene? With Jedi, there's really, I went through the whole thing a couple times, and there really are not practically any deleted scenes that could be considered something that we would be going crazy over. The closest thing to that, and this is why I asked you about the art earlier, is that the first page of the first one, number 1 of those individual ones, has a picture of, and it's something they do on each of these 4 comics. They do a portrait of a hand holding a weapon, and behind it something Star Warsy. Well, this one shows you Luke holding what, if you believe this art, a blue saber, which is completely wrong. And in the background, you see the droids in Tatooine in the desert. And it almost kind of looks like Luke emerging from the cave where he's building the lightsaber, and you see the droids kind of waiting in the background. I don't know if it was meant to be that. I don't know if they just got lucky and they just randomly drew a picture that mimicked that. But the comic itself never talks about it. If you want to see that scene, you got to go get the Blu-ray and look at the deleted scenes from Return of the Jedi. So that's something that I think was kind of interesting in terms of, that's the closest thing we're going to get. But it would have been nice if whatever deleted scenes, from Jedi that are out there that we know now exist would have worked their way into this comic book. In other words, I guess they didn't go from any original script. They went with the complete last version of just about everything, and they even avoided things.
That's like I say, they had more of a relationship, more control, what was happening. If they didn't by that point have that relationship, that meant that the movie probably wasn't that, wasn't expected to do that well, which was, of course, that was crazy talk.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the shots look pretty close to the final product. And yeah, I'm looking at these frames and they look like somebody went frame by frame. Like the framing is so accurate that to me, it looks like somebody traced an actual film frame. And, the way that the character hunches over to the left, the way the cheek is turned to the right looks exactly like pictures. Now, again, I don't know if they had a buttload of pictures and all they did was just trace everything, because it's amazing how perfect it looks. However, the places where you do see some differences, and it kind of makes sense, because if you remember, especially Star Wars films, especially any films, but Star Wars in the 80s, the special effects were the last thing they always did. So where you do notice some differences in very high special effect shots, spaceships, creatures, anything like that, you see a little more artistic, imagination taking place.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. The other place that you also notice a little difference in the style, that it doesn't copy the frame that much, is that every now and then they'll use what I would consider to be the McQuarrie art for Return of the Jedi. So you'll see these sprawling kind of scenic shots that are not in the film, but they're part of the art, which is kind of weird and ironic, because if you remember, by the time McQuarrie got to do the art for Return of the Jedi, he never really completed it. And what ended up happening is that because the marketing department wanted to put out a portfolio like they did on the first two films, so they said, you know what, Ralph, can you just take some other shots, or can you just modify them so instead of looking so concept-y, so they look more like the final product? And that's what he ended up doing, which I think I heard he wasn't too happy about, but he just did it because, hey, it's a job and that's what they want me to do, and I'll do it. So Return of the Jedi is technically one of the least...
I gave you that.
You did, and it's funny because on the internet you can sometimes find the difference between his concept of a character and then the final product that was packaged for the portfolio, and it was like, well, why is it different? The Emperor looks one way when he drew it the first time, and then he looks just like the actor afterwards. There are differences in all that kind of stuff, which is interesting, but they were able to use it for the comic book, at least, for the final product.
And I'm impressed that you actually did that research. That's important stuff, because you some of those things slip by us, even though we're so absorbed with
the little details that you're like, wait a minute, well, something's not right here. What's going on? How could he have? Because I kept looking at these pictures and I'm like, wow, he nailed these right on the spot. His concepts are identical to the finished product. And then when you read the history, it's like, no, they asked him to come back and kind of redo them and retouch them and add a couple. Oh my God, we only have 15 pictures, but the portfolio should have 20. By the time you get to Return of the Jedi, there's not as much concept needed because a majority of your characters are established already. You don't have to imagine what Princess Leia's face looks like because it's there already. Maybe the clothes look a little different. Okay, fine. But there's only a limited amount of characters and ships and locations that McQuarrie had to draw, and that's basically where you're at.
And they probably just didn't want to unveil too much. They didn't want to give away too much other than general locations or storyline. And that's fine. It was still a time where there was pre-internet. So we would read, as we've talked about ad nauseum, Starlog and Life magazine or Time magazine, if they put a little story in a little photo, a new photo or something. So it was still a fun time to be out there looking and finding things. Mm-hmm. So don't misunderstand us as if by Jedi, we were all modern and everything was happening. It was still a bit of the Wild West.
Yeah. And like I said before, because of the special effects of the last thing, another area where you might notice things look different in the comic is the Jabba aliens. When Luke is fighting them in the desert skiff, the aliens look like traditional comic book, let's randomly create aliens, and they don't look anything like the aliens that he's fighting in the skiff. And maybe that's because either they were allowed to have a little more creative, leeway, or because of the special effects of the lightsaber and the laser bolts, maybe they didn't have those shots. They only had storyboards of where which way Luke's going to swing, but the alien, to be determined, what the alien is. Now, you also mentioned earlier that another difference, and I did notice that too, was that we do not see Yoda die properly like we do in the movie. We see him, like you said, taking a nap or something like that. And maybe that's because it was maybe they realized they wanted to keep Yoda's death as a spoiler-free type of thing back then. So, that's a possibility of why they didn't delve into the comic book. Again, maybe it's because he fades out into nothing and that's a special effect and they didn't have that. Another thing that I noticed is that as you go forward in these comics, I don't know if they get lazy or you can call it creativity or whatever you want to call it, but there are certain panels where the backgrounds are completely blank. In other words, you see the foreground action of something, a speeder bike or Luke or something, and in the background, there's no detail. It's black or it's white or it's something like that. And it's like, what is that? Is that a style thing that I'm not aware of? I mean, have you ever seen stuff like that on purpose? Or are they just running out of time and getting lazy?
It might have been. I have a feeling these guys were working on other stuff as well. And they're like, look, we got to put this out. So do that. Get it out there, make it look pretty decent, but it didn't have to be absolutely perfect.
Yeah. The colors to me looked a little muddled in the comic book version. And again, I don't know if that's because of the paper quality and the newspaper-ish type of thing.
I think they were a little brighter and crisper.
On your magazine.
In the magazine version. It was shinier. It was a little bit shinier and better quality. It was definitely more magazine paper. It wasn't the comic style paper.
Okay. We also do not see Vader's face revealed in the comic book, which again, maybe it's because it's a spoiler issue because, you don't want to see Vader's face until the last conceivable minute. Not so much special effect, because if you think about it, there's not much special effects. He's wearing a prosthetic and stuff like that, but maybe they were withholding that as much as humanly possible from the fans. You don't see the Force ghosts at the end. Now, here's what's funny. You do not see the three Force ghosts at the end, or the three Force ghosts at the end. Panel. The final panel is not the Force Ghost. However, in one of those little mini posters that I was telling you about, which I don't know if it made it to that particular version, there is a mini poster of the three Force Ghosts. So it's like, why would you make a poster but not have it included in the story? That's the most important thing, is the story. It's a weird little, weird little thing about it. But like I said, overall, there is really not too much that I was able to grab out of it in terms of little nuggets of information or little nuggets of missing scenes or anything like that, because it's so straightforward. It's ridiculous how straightforward it is. That you probably thought was the end of it, but as we have learned in the last two shows we did like this, it's never the end of it because they keep reprinting the crap out of these things. Now, the comic that you talked about, the one that came all in one issue, was then reissued again when the special editions came out. By that time, they were reprinting them again. They would, like I mentioned earlier, the art, the words are the same. They just update the colors. They look a little bit, to me, they look way better because of the fact that they look so different.
Yeah, they
the
cleaned
colors.
them up in a little bit better quality paper. Probably You're talking around like the Dark Horse era and stuff like that.
And this is the mid to late 90s, I think 97, 96, 97, when the special editions came out. So they were able to include, a little bonus material, and that would be like some concept art from the original trilogy. They would throw some of that in there. They might even throw some special edition concept art. However, the comic did not have any special edition added material into this version. They just
reprinted it.
They did it for A New Hope. If you guys remember, when we covered A New Hope, the special edition New Hope comic book that was redone, it was redrawn, everything was redone. It was completely fresh, and it included special edition scenes. For Empire and Jedi, they for some reason did not add any new material.
Doesn't that feel like a jip? You know what I mean? It feels.
Why would you do it for one and not the other two?
That's the point of the special edition. That's the whole point.
Right. I'm very disappointed because I enjoyed, and this is like a weird offshoot of
maybe they just couldn't mimic the same artwork and they couldn't get the same guys and they figured, I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm trying to make an excuse for them, but there's no good excuse.
Because I enjoyed the New Hope, the redrawn New Hope with the extra scenes in it, I was hoping they would have done the same thing for the other two. Hell, use the same people. I don't know. They did a good job. I liked them. But no, for whatever reason, they don't. The only little extras you got, like I mentioned, for the special edition is the concept art that they threw afterwards at the end, like as your bonus material. The cover of the comic is also kind of weird, cheesy. It's just a picture of Leia, from slave Leia, her face. You don't even see her body. It's her face. So it's like very unusual how they decided to do that. After that, a couple of years after that, this is something that I just found out recently. I've never had the chance to look for it. They put out a Japanese version of Return of the Jedi, which it's a color cover, but all the art inside is black and white, and it is super manga.
Is it more manga style? And
it's complete manga influence. It's just dripping in manga.
And you own that one now?
I will soon. Let's put it that way. Because of the research, I keep searching for these things. I just found a good deal. They're only like $2-3 a piece. It's a 4-issue set. Great. Wonderful.
Yeah, that's
perfect.
Pretty neat to have. That's nice. That style artwork is it is good stuff. So I'm glad you're able to find that.
So as the 90s were ending, I don't know exactly what year it was, but then Dark Horse got the rights to Star Wars, and they just grabbed all the original stuff, the one you talked about first, the one that I talked about, and all that stuff. They grabbed it, reprinted the crap out of that. I'm holding one right here. The same cover as yours, the dark Luke with the dark Vader in the back. Again, they only changed the coloring. And to me, the coloring, I love the way they changed the coloring. And, in these future issues, in the back of that one, you have a ton of original trilogy concept art. And it's wonderful because it's all full of McQuarrie, Joe Johnston, Nilo's, what's his nose? I keep forgetting his last name. It has the Yuzums. It has the original Ewoks, the original Jabba. It's great. I love this comic book because of mainly because of the bonus material in the back and the coloring. Because
I never repurchased things like that. I had the originals. I didn't feel the need to go and repurchase again and again. So I don't have all those. I have the originals. They're where they are. Mm-hmm. And I kept buying the Star Wars comic till it ended. I don't want to give the wrong impression. I just did not rebuy future reprints like when Dark Horse did it. I looked at them at the shops. I looked at, I checked out what they were doing.
Yeah.
But
eventually, as you very well know, Dark Horse lost the rights and they went back to Marvel when, with the whole sale with Lucasfilm sold over, when that happened. So what Disney Marvel, if you will, did was they repackaged once again the one we just talked about as a hardcover. And, you wouldn't believe me if I told you this, but it is so much better. It's the same art. The colors are so, I wish you have to see this. And what's cool about it is that in this particular version, they included every single cover that they ever put out in those little individual magazines. They also recolored the covers. They recovered those little posters we talked about earlier. They're in there too. Everything conceivable having to do with whatever format that this was published in, as far as the comic version goes, it's all in here. The different artists, it even has like the some of the black and white drawings and how they progressed, how they added more material to it and that sort of thing. And these particular ones are cool because in the back, you can peel a little sticker and they give you a code so you can have the digital version, so you can load it into your computer or
on your phone
iPad.
Or something, your iPad.
Yeah, you can. It's a digital version of your comic book. A lot of people are doing that, from what I understand. They don't even bother buying them anymore, in paper form. They go straight for digital, which, I still like to kind of hold the stuff and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm old-fashioned. I know we've talked about this. I like to have the actual item in my hand.
Yeah, this one came out last year. The other thing that also came out last year, and it continued through this year, and I think you might have gotten a look at it. It was a Korean web comic book version of all the 3 original films that were fantastic because those were the ones that were dipping into not only deleted scenes, but they were dipping into, remember, we were talking about even radio drama stuff. They were kind of incorporating some of that. It was like, holy crap, this is great. And the art is different. Because it's Korean, it's not exactly Japanese style, but it does have a little bit of that in it. It's a completely different look. So I love seeing the different interpretations of the same exact story. I love seeing that. And that's the one that I mentioned before. I've been downloading the individual JPEGs and kind of building them into a file because you can't buy this. It's on a website, so you can't buy it. So that's a great freebie for anybody who wants something for free. They're up there. Look, just type and do a Google search for Star Wars Korean web comic series or something, and you'll find it. It's all in there. It's going to take you a long time because it's very long how they go, page by page, that sort of thing.
You've got the patience of Job, as they say. Because
believe it or not, I'm still working on it. I'm still trying to download it.
Willing to find them and assemble them and create your own file comic book or something. It's brilliant.
The final one I want to talk about, the final version of something having to do with the original trilogy comic book adaptation, is something that just came out a few weeks ago called the Star Wars Original Trilogy, a graphic novel. And what this is it's all 3 original Star Wars films, New Hope, Empire, and Jedi. And it is done by Disney. You can tell this is a Disney product. This is probably the biggest nightmare that any Star Wars fan could have, having to do with Disney owning Star Wars. What they did is they created a comic book version that the art is super Disneyfied. Now, I'm not saying cute. It's not like cutie, princessy type of Disneyfied, but when you look at this art, you're like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. It's got a Disney feel.
This art makes Ezra look hardcore.
Well, yeah, it's the way the characters pose, the way they kind of frown, it's got
the twinkle in their eye.
Yeah, but it's cool. What's really cool about it is that in this particular version, they do honor the special editions. In other words, remember, in the previous ones, we were just complaining that they never bothered going all the way. This one, you do see all the little changes that you saw with the special edition. They are here in this 3-movie book. At the end of the book, it even says, coming soon, additional Star Wars. Let's see, coming soon in the same series, all the other episodes of the epic saga, which means they are going to put the rest of them out in this Disney-style art, which I'm cool with that. I'm fine with it. I know that.
And you bought this.
I bought this. I'm going to read it. But it's I don't have the patience to go into the entire library of comic books. It's too much. Just like with my collections, and we talked about this, I need to first narrow down the focus and make it so narrow that then I can go crazy within this very narrow beam of information. If my narrow beam is original movie adaptations, then I'm trying to grab all the different versions of this original movie adaptations. Heck, come up with something that was made only for Turkey or only for Brazil, and I'll try to find it as long as it's within that parameter. But yeah, I don't know what else they can do. I know that I'm pretty sure that they're going to re-release, and this is probably for a future episode, the prequel comic book adaptations, because they did them. There was not too much hurrah about it. There wasn't that much of a big deal, but they're out there. I think I have them all in a basic format.
I was kind of out of the game around that time, and I don't feel like I went and made that effort, because those were Dark Horse. And yes. I looked at some of the Dark Horses. Every now and then I'd read. If I was at a shop, I'd read through it. But I didn't really buy any of those adaptations.
Yeah, I think I ended up getting them after the fact. Kind of like when I started going deep into this whole movie adaptation thing, I was like, oh, crap, did they ever make them? Because I don't even remember seeing them, in stores while these prequels were out. But then, as usual, you go to eBay and just type it and see what pops up. And, they did make one. Oh, how much is it? $4? $5? Okay, what the hell, $5? I can afford $5. They are going to, I believe, do these little hardcover versions like they did, last year with Star Wars Empire and Jedi, which would be a nice little, it would be a nice thing to have on your bookcase. You have all the whole trilogy. And obviously, they are about to release, I think in June, if I'm correct, the Force Awakens version of the comic book adaptation. So you know that whatever they do for one, they're going to do them for all. And I do love seeing these foreign versions of all these comics. I remember at one point, I think we might have talked about it, somebody found on the internet, and we posted it like a couple of times, a Chinese version of A New Hope that is so wacky out there. It has nothing to do with Marvel. It has nothing to do with any known artist, but I don't understand. I don't even know if it was legal, to tell you the truth. But
generally it wasn't, because Star Wars wasn't even big in China.
It looks so bizarre that it's just one of these things that is so amazingly differently weird that it's worth looking at. Look it up. Again, go online, type original trilogy, Star Wars, A New Hope, Chinese comic book, and you're going to be like, what just happened here? Because they're so out there with some of these things. But I think this pretty much wraps it up for the third of the original trilogy, Return of the Jedi. I hope, if there are any other versions out there that I don't know about, let us know, because I'll probably end up looking for it.
And I just want to mention to people, they did, I don't know if the deal is the same nowadays with comics, but there are reprint versions. Try to find the originals. So they're not even that expensive. So even if it's $1 more, find yourself the originals rather than the reprints. And sometimes right at the top, you see the word reprint. Sometimes you have to open up inside,
right,
and where the title page is, and you can read.
Especially because they're not that expensive, even though it's an older magazine.
Yeah,
like I said, $10 probably.
The original Star Wars ones maybe are expensive, and some of the 70s stuff is still a little bit pricey, just because there was less of it made. That's why they try to keep it a little. The guys selling it try to keep it a little high. The only difference I've seen in the version that you mentioned, that first original magazine size one, is one that has a comic book cover, which is a blue sky in the background with smoke pouring in the air. I think that might have been British version or something.
And I think it might have also been one of those little pocket paperback size ones. Remember when they used to, like an Empire, they printed a large and then a small paperback? It might have been a paperback.
I had the Jedi. I think I got the Jedi paperback size. They kind of put them out, and you'd grab them if you see them at the supermarket or a bookshelf. And, all right, it's Star Wars. I got to buy it.
Now, I don't know if they ever did a black and white one, because I know for A New Hope, they did release a large version of the magazine, the comic book, but inside it was all black and white. I don't know if Empire or Jedi ever did that, but don't be surprised, because, again, they try to do so many variant versions of them that every now and then you'll find something weird.
Well, keep looking. You can tell us.
Definitely tell us, because, again, it's one of these little focuses that I have, collecting focuses that I have, and I have my own rules and everything. But I want to, as usual, thank James for joining me today and giving me his particular history of how he landed on top of Return of the Jedi comic book.
Yeah, I'm still thrilled that I got it before, 5 other people.
No matter what we do, we spoil it, especially with the Return of the Jedi for some reason. I spoiled myself with the storybook and you spoiled yourself with the comic, so we kind of knew already what was happening ahead of time. And as usual, I want to also thank you guys for joining me, and we will see you here next time at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Return to a galaxy far, far away.
Here we go again.
Return to Jabba the Hutt.
You will bring Captain Solo and the Wookiee to me.
Return to the Death Star.
Obi-Wan has taught you well.
Return to the Ewoks of Endor.
Not bad for a little furball.
But most of all, return for the fun of it. Return of the Jedi, rated PG. Now playing at a selected theater near you.
It's Star Wars. I got to buy it.
Chewbacca can do it.
F Mr. Spock. Han Solo's the man.
Chicken Walker.